Welcome to the Stewardship Sessions, the podcast where money meets meaning. Here, we talk about building wealth with wisdom, shaping a mindset rooted in purpose, and pursuing a mission guided by faith. I'm your host, Jason Stanley, and together we'll explore intentional living, one conversation at a time.
Welcome back. Who you are today is not who you are. It is who you were. We live life in this constant residual of decisions that we've made so far in our life. A lot of times we look at our life, we go, this is who I am. I am this. And we preface a lot of what we do right and what we do wrong by this is who I am. And, this is something that permeates throughout society, right? There's this idea that you are just one way and that's how you're always going to be. And the reality of that is this is simply just not true. I don't know that where you've been in life. I can tell you about my life and what I've seen take place in my life. I can tell you that who I am today is a residual of decisions that I've made so far. And who I'm going to be in the future probably is not going to be the same person. And when I look at my life, right, I can talk about my childhood and who I was as a kid. I wasn't the most popular kid by any stretch of the imagination, but I was generally liked. I was tall for my age until a certain point, and then I wasn't as tall as a lot of people and that kind of thing. But I struggled in school a bit. I struggled to focus. I had teachers that thought I had ADD, which I probably do. But I've since learned that that's a great tool to be able to work with because it allows me to hyper-focus on things that I'm very interested in. And the things I'm not very interested in, I'm like a little kid. I fight with myself over doing them, doing activities that I don't enjoy doing. And so, the great thing is I built a wonderful team around me that help accomplish those things that I'm not good at. But I struggled through school. I muddled through it, got somehow, by the grace of God, ended up getting accepted into college, struggled there until I found a pathway. You've heard me talk about being homeless. I was homeless at one point in my life because I made horrible financial decisions. Came out of that, went into the military to get my legs back under me, and also started to develop disciplines, and I left the military, and after being a soldier and being in combat, started as a financial advisor and took the principles and concepts that I learned in the military, applied them to business, and was able to see success out of that. But we're constantly changing who we are. And if you're not growing, is what I would say. So again, who you are today is not who you are. It's a residual of decisions that you've made so far. So if you like the path that you're on, keep making the same decisions. That's great. And you will develop into somebody else. If you don't like the path you're on, change the decisions that you're making, and it will start to take you in a different direction. Suddenly you'll become somebody else. So in all scenarios, we're becoming different versions of ourselves. We have a lot of different versions of ourselves throughout our lives. And again, it's not who you are, it's who you were. It's the decisions that you made so far that bring you to the point that you're at. And not to run too far off into this, quantum physics idea of whether or not the present is real and that kind of thing. But I would say that a lot of times what we experience as present life isn't really present life. It's this constant evolution of decisions that we've made to bring us to where we're at. And as you look at life and as you look at how do I become something else, I think you have to sit down and take the time to write out what you want it to look like. It's not all going to be the same. It's not all going to happen. You're not going to get everything you want, but you can write out a general direction that you want to take life. And I think what will happen is you'll be ever amazed at who you become in that process. It could be that you start down a path and realize that's not for me at all. I thought that's what I wanted. It's not what I want. And that kind of thing. And so we have most people that I know have gone through a lot of different iterations of themselves. They've, some people have torn themselves down and rebuilt themselves. Some people have consistently built themselves up over time. Other people have struggled and they continue to struggle and that kind of stuff. So, and like I said, some people have, they struggle in life. They continue to make the same decisions that make them struggle. I'm not saying that life's easier for some and harder for others. Everybody's got their own lot to take in this life. And sometimes life is harder for some people. But what matters is how you view and handle that situation. So if you're in a situation, life's been hard on you and stuff like that, I'm not saying that it should necessarily all your fault. Maybe it is, maybe it's not. But how you look at it and how you handle it can definitely change the direction that you're going. And so if you're focused on that, again, as your focus goes, so there goes your energy, and then whatever you're giving energy to, you're giving life to. And so when you start saying I am, whatever follows the I am starts to write out what the next version of you is going to look like. So if your talk is, I am sick, I am tired, I am frustrated, I am, whatever you're saying I am, that is the flag that you're starting to plant that is going to take you to become that version of yourself next. I'm trying to remember the guy's name right now. He's since passed away, but he talked about the power of I am. And the power of I am, whenever you say I am something, it really does create who you're going to become next. And so, again, we're not necessarily who we think we are, right? You can have grounding principles that help define your life, and hopefully those are good grounding principles. You can have grounding principles that are negative too, if you're not careful, and it's easy to fall into in this life. So, but you can play with this concept, try it. Try to play with this concept of I am healthy, I am wealthy, I am giving, I am whatever you want to be. And see if you don't start to become that person over time. If you say things enough times, you'll start to believe it, and whatever you believe in, that's what you start to see. So if the talk around I am is positive, then you're likely going to see more positive changes in your life than you are negative. If the talk around I am is negative, I am sick, I'm tired, I'm frustrated, I'm bored, I am this, right? That is likely the direction that you're going to see your life move in. And I really wish I could remember the person's name that did so much work around this. He was actually just a really great human being, had a lot of really good insights of stuff, and he had a horrible childhood growing up and had a rough, adolescent time period and rough start to life, and then over time developed out this method of thinking and this method of looking at life that he was able to radically transform who he was into something that was really impactful to the world. And he impacted a lot of people's lives in very positive ways. Tony Robbins is a great example of that. Had really rough childhood, really hard time growing up, poor and stuff like that. And he changed the way he was referring to himself and set a vision for himself of who he wanted to become. And who he is today is far different than who he was back then. And so if you would have sat down with him back then and he said, and asked him, he would have said, well, I'm poor. I'm broke. I'm this. I'm that. I don't have, And instead, he chose to write that in a different way, and he started saying things differently, and he started putting himself on a path that completely radically changed his life, and he's also changed a lot of other people's lives for the better. But I think one of the easiest ways to start to do that is by grounding yourself. And I'm not talking about grounding in terms of walking barefoot out on the grass. There may be some health benefits to that. I'm not sure. I've seen a lot of videos on grounding, but what I mean by grounding yourself is taking time to spend time with yourself, to find something that you enjoy. I think it's really easy in our society to take the downtime that we have and go, well, I'm going to go drink with my buddies and stuff like that. And you go and you have fun in a moment, and you come out of it and you're still depleted because you're doing something that's not healthy for you. Number one, you're hungover and stuff like that. And so you've still depleted out your energy. And your energy is really important. You have to preserve it. You have to guard it. Have you ever been around somebody who is negative all the time and you just feel like they suck the energy right out of you? And then other times you're around people that are just so uplifting, so positive, so excited that you just feel energized when you're around them. And, I think it's important to recognize those situations. And you really have to guard against that. There's certain people that if I know I'm going to be around them, I know that I've got to be in peak state. I've got to be at a really high energy level because I know they're going to pull me down. I don't want to go into that situation kind of half full because it's going to deplete me even further, and I'm going to walk away feeling very empty. And so I think you have to have the time period that you set aside, whether it's you spend time in prayer or you go out into nature and walk. We talked about this in other episodes of just breaking up the daily monotony of how life is, because it's really easy to get stuck in a trap of a way of thinking, and spend time doing something that fills you up, that gives you energy, that brings peace into your life, and that you can walk away from it feeling filled up, feeling fulfilled. And when you do that, it suddenly becomes easier to start to change that talk around I am. How many times do we get into cycles in life, or we don't have healthy boundaries with people, and we overextend ourselves and we start to burn out? We see it all the time. Our society loves burnout. We love it. We celebrate it, and if you don't believe me, go into any social setting and ask people how they are. And you're always going to get something along these lines. Oh, I've been so busy, or oh, there's been so much going on. It's so hectic right now, because we celebrate this idea of hustling, of this hustle culture that we live in. We celebrate this idea that in order to be important, you have to be busy. And in order to be busy, you have to appear like you're stressed or burned out. We really do portray that a lot. It's nonsense. We don't have to be like that, and we shouldn't be like that. And I think in a past episode I talked about this. I had been writing out a goal for a long time that I wanted to finish some certain pilot ratings, right? I wanted to get my instrument rating as a pilot. I wanted to be able to, get an airplane and do all this stuff around it, because I love aviation. It's one of the joys in my life that I get to experience. And it's a time period whenever I go flying that I'm completely cut off from the world, other than talking to air traffic control. but I'm not, my phone can't go off because I don't have cell signal up there and that kind of stuff. And so it's really peaceful. It's very peaceful to me. For other people, it's terrifying. Usually the people sit in the back of my airplane. I'm kidding. It reminds me of the joke, I hope to go like Grandpa did, quietly in his sleep. He passed so peacefully in his sleep. I really don't want to be like the other people riding in the back of the car while he was driving. So there's nothing that says that this can't be fun. And I may tell some horrible jokes in this. I got really bad dad jokes too, right? But, when I go flying, it's such a peaceful time period for me. It fills me up. It's exciting. It's so beautiful to see. It's, I'm enamored with it. I love looking out at the wing of the airplane as we're flying and just being amazed at the fact that you can move air over this surface and lift yourself off the ground into the sky. It's just, yes, there's a lot of physics involved and that kind of stuff. But again, I find it very peaceful. Other people don't. Other people get stressed out when they have to fly. They're nervous. They're scared. They're scared of the what ifs. I look at it and I just enjoy the time of it. And yes, I've had things that have gone wrong while flying. I've flown for 30 years. But it's still one of the ways that I can break away and, take time. And despite everything that I'm doing, all the controls that I have to monitor and things that I have to do, it's a time period that I get to really find joy in something and come out of it. And I feel better than when I went into it. I feel more filled up, more fulfilled. And hopefully you have something like that in your life that you can do. But I think you have to take the time to break away to go do those things and start breaking away from that culture. I'll go back to the story that I was telling you. I kind of went off on a little tangent there about, the joy that I get from flying. But, I'd been writing this goal out for a long time I think it was probably like 4 or 5 years. Every year is on my goals for the year. This year I'm going to finish my instrument rating. I'm going to get an airplane, all this other stuff. And it never seemed to be happening. And so I sat down and I started examining why wasn't I able to do this? I was able to hit a lot of my business goals. And then it hit me. I noticed what I just told you about. I was going into meetings, I was going into social settings, and I was talking to people, and they would say, "Oh, I've been so busy." And I would say the same thing. "Oh, yeah, I haven't had time to do anything. I've been so busy," right? Because I wanted to be like them. I wanted them to like me. And we like people who are like us. And so we often mirror to people what we think that they want from us. And I said, what if I changed how I said things? And again, I think I've talked about this in a previous episode, but it is worth repeating because it's really important, I think, to recognize how your talk can limit your ability to achieve what you can have the best intentions, but if your talk doesn't align with what you are trying to do, you're never going to be able to do it. And it also, too, limits who you can become, right? So if your talk isn't aligning with who you really want to become, you're never going to change. You're going to stay in the same boat. So I said, all right, well, every time I go into a social setting like that or a business meeting and stuff, and I ask people how they're doing, and they say, "I've been so busy," I am going to say, I don't know what's going on. It's been so amazing. I've had way more free time than I ever have had in my life. I've been able to pursue the hobbies and desires that I wanted to pursue, and business is still growing organically, and it's been phenomenal. And I still work to do that to this day. In fact, as I've said before, if I truly am busy, I will recognize that in a conversation. I will say I am busy, but that I expect that to end and I will put a time period by which I expect that to be over with so that I can start pursuing things that fulfill me, that fill me up, things that I enjoy in life, because it's so easy to get wrapped up in this monotony. The first time I went out and did that, the person that I said that to literally just stopped talking to me and basically walked away because they didn't know how to handle that. They didn't know why is he able to have free time and I'm not, kind of thing. And the reality is we all have the same 24 hours a day to work with. We all have the same amount of time awake to work with. Some of us sleep later into the day than others. I'm not an early riser. I don't get up at 5 a.m. I'm not a fan of that idea. There's all kinds of videos that if you wake up at 5 a.m., you're going to be, it doesn't make you wealthy. It makes me really tired. I hate doing it, So, I recognize that about myself and I maximize the time that I do have. Some people need more sleep than others, that kind of stuff. But in any case, that person didn't know how to deal with what I was saying because it was such a foreign concept. But what I started noticing is the more I said that, the more free time I found. The more time that I unlocked that I wasn't filling with nonsense, that I was able to go do those things. So I was able to go in 1 year, I went back, got re-rated as a pilot, got my instrument rating, ended up buying an airplane to be, towards the end of that year. Owned that airplane for 3 years. I fly a lot. I fly about 250 hours a year. Just put that in perspective. That's time that the engine's actually running. So that's a lot of flight time. I spend a lot of time flying and I love it. And I get to use it for business because we have locations kind of spread out all over the country. And so I'm able to use that as a mode of transportation to go visit those locations, go visit our teams. And it's such a fulfilling thing. But it changed once I changed the way that I was saying things. Once I stopped saying, I am so busy, I am so busy, I don't have time. Once I stopped using those terms and I started saying, I am free to do and pursue passions that I have in life. And my business is growing organically and I'm not really having to work that hard to bring in new business and that kind of stuff. Once I started saying that, suddenly those things started to become my reality. And it wasn't that I changed the amount of hours that I worked. It wasn't that I changed my approach. I didn't just go sit on the couch at home and hope that business showed up. I still stayed active. I still stayed focused on what I was doing, but I started recognizing where in my life I could expand and do more. And so I think it's really easy to get suckered into making yourself overly busy, right? You overcommit yourself. You volunteer for too much. People come to you and say, can you do? And you just say yes. Learn how to say no. There's nothing wrong with saying no. I hope this one doesn't get me struck down. I'll use this example. My youngest son wanted to volunteer at church. He wanted to be a greeter at our church. And so the pastor had called me and he said, hey, I wanted to give you a call because Caleb has said that he wants to volunteer to be a greeter at church. I said, yes. I said, he told me about that. I said, I'm very proud of that. That's great. And he said, well, it's just odd because normally it's the, children of parents that are already volunteering. And I simply said, I appreciate that, but I am not in a position where I feel like I can devote time to being able to volunteer in that manner, right? So I will support him in that. I will make sure that he's there to be able to do those things, but it's not something that I am able to currently do, right? Because I have focuses elsewhere at the moment. And, so again, learning how to say no to something. And that's a really easy one to get kind of pulled into, right? And especially if you're active in the church and stuff like that, it's really easy for you to feel obligated to do those things. And there's nothing wrong with volunteering. Don't get me wrong. I think it's wonderful. But when you start to take on so much that you deplete yourself and you don't give yourself time to refill, you can't pour out into others. You can't give the best version of yourself to the world around you. And if you're not giving the best version of yourself, you're not trying to be the best version of yourself that you can be, then you're going to get lackluster results, and people aren't going to respond to you very well either, right? Because that starts to come across. And it all starts with that self-talk. So who you are presently, again, is not who you are, it's who you were. It's who the decisions that you've made so far, the self-talk that you've had so far that have brought you to become the person that you are today. And maybe that's a wonderful person. And I hope it is. And I think I think most people are really wonderful people. But maybe it's not. Maybe you're not who you want to be today. And you have to recognize that we are ever changing beings. We are always changing. We are always reinventing ourselves. We're always becoming a different version of ourselves than what we were. And if you look throughout your life, like I said, I talked through kind of my life, the different versions of myself. I mean, there was one point in time where I had long hair, 4 earrings in this ear, 1 in this one. I even pierced my tongue. And some of you are going to stop listening now because you're going to be like, oh my God. That was my rebellious stage in life. Luckily, I recognized, I was dating a young lady at that same time who worked for a very wealthy family in the city that we lived in. And I remember she invited me to one of their family picnics, and I went in and I wanted to know what these people were doing because I wanted to be able to get to where they were in life. I thought that would be, that they could help me with that. I could learn something from them. And I started talking to them, and I might as well have had leprosy. I was invisible to these people because I didn't look like them. And I didn't go back home and sit down and go, well, this is who I am. And if they can't accept me, then blah, 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 blah. I don't want to be like them or any of that stuff. No, I recognized that instead, it wasn't them. They had the way that they were used to doing things and the way that they were used to receiving each other in appearance and so on and so forth. And I said, well, look, if I want to be able to learn from them, I have to be willing to change, right? And we live in this society that says that you shouldn't change who you are for anybody. And that's nonsense. You're constantly changing who you are to get people to accept you. So if you're rebelling in life and you want to look a certain way and that kind of stuff, that's fine. You're doing that so that the people who also do that accept you as being that rebellious type and that kind of thing. So I didn't go back home and sit down and go, well, this is who I am. I said, no, this is who I was. And if I want to be somebody different in the future, if I want to be where those people are at, if I want to, have the kind of life that they have, I have to be willing to change me, right? They're already there. They don't have to change them. I have to change me. And so I literally went that evening. I took out all the piercings, went the next day, got a normal haircut. I had long hair. I know it's hard to believe because I'm bald now. Kind of wish I still had the long hair. But, cut my hair, bought clothes that fit because I had the real baggy clothes back whenever I was a kid. That skater look was really popular. So I had the really baggy clothes and, chains and rings and all this stuff. And the reality is I was just trying to impress the people that I was hanging around. It wasn't really who I was. I was just testing boundaries to figure out who I wanted to be. And the next time I went with my girlfriend to one of their family events, they didn't even realize they had met me before. They had no idea that I was the same person that went with her before. They thought that I was a new boyfriend. And I kind of was. I kind of changed who I was. I changed my version of I am. And that changed the way that they received me. And I ended up learning a lot about life from them. I ended up learning a ton about family wealth, and the whole process of building out this family wealth dynamics was based on being able to first learn about that family and then be able to work with other families that had done the same thing. And now that family's on their, I don't know, eighth generation now of wealth. And it's been amazing to watch. And it's funny because now I go to them as a peer. I'm not beneath them. I'm a peer to them, and they receive me as a peer. But I look at that first interaction and I often wonder, had I done what so much of our society says to do, of saying, well, this is who I am. If you can't accept me for who I am, then you're the problem. How different would my life be? By saying, and look, and I'm not saying compromise your beliefs. I'm not saying compromise who the foundations of your life to appease other people to get somewhere. I think you have to have foundations, but recognizing the areas that you can change will change the direction of your life. When you start changing the way you talk about I am, when you start saying I am, and whatever follows becomes a different way of talking than what you have been, you are going to become a completely different person. You're going to become a completely different individual, and the way the world receives you, the way people receive you is going to change. The people that receive you is going to change. You can't change your life and not have some people fall off and new people come in. It just happens, and that's okay. I've often said what we are to do is open our hands and let go and recognize that we don't own anything. We don't control anything. The relationships that we have, they're not ours. Each relationship is individual. So if you open up your hands, I believe that God will move in your life and out of your life the things and people that are supposed to be there in the time that they're supposed to be there. And your job is to trust and to have faith that will happen. And so I never looked at, as I've progressed throughout life, there have been people that I thought were good friends that fell away. And while it kind of sucks in some ways, I have to look at it and say, it's not because I became rude or mean or vindictive to those people or any of those things. It's because I changed who I was in that moment. It's just like the guy that I walked up to at that very first business meeting and said, I have more free time and all this stuff. And he literally just stops, looks at me, goes, oh, and turns around and starts talking to somebody else. Again, some people aren't going to get it, and that's okay. You don't have, if your goal is just to impress everybody that's currently in your life, then keep saying the same things that you've been saying and keep referring to yourself in the I am that you've been saying, and you're going to have those same results. If your goal is to better yourself and to put yourself around the people that can help you become better, whether it's financial, whether it's health, whether it's in your relationships and that kind of stuff, if that's your goal, then you have to be willing to change that talk in order to be able to get into that environment and put yourself to be there, creating yourself to be that type of person. And so I think it's really easy in our world to get wrapped up in this stuff. But I think in order to change that, you really have to be able to set boundaries. You have to be able to slow down and take time to reflect. We oftentimes get so busy and we're running on this treadmill and, we're going from this, we're running kids around, we're doing this, we're doing that. And we never take time just to sit down and reflect on who we are in that moment, how we've gotten to the point that we're at. And say to ourselves, is this who I want to be in the future? Is this the version of me that I want to carry forward? And maybe it is. And if it is, great, right? But chances are there's something in your life that you want to improve. And so in order to do that, you have to be able to start setting up these boundaries. You have to be able to say no to stuff. You have to say, I am going to go fill myself up first, right? And so, it can be simple activities. Every morning I get up, especially when the weather's nice like it is right now, I get my cup of coffee, I go out on the back porch, I sit down, I don't have my phone with me, I don't start doom scrolling or any of that nonsense. I just sit there, and I'm usually thinking. You'll have ideas pop into my head, things that I'd like to do, stuff like that, but that helps center me for my day, and it helps align my day for me because it gives me a moment just to sit, reflect on who I am, reflect on decisions that I've made, start thinking about what I want to be in the future. Who do I want to become? How do I want to be known? How do I want to be seen? And I'm not doing it in a selfish way of going, oh, look at me. I hope I become famous. No, I hope that I can impact the world in a positive way. I hope that I can impact other people's lives in a positive way. And so that's what I reflect on. And in doing so, I fill myself up before I ever step into the office. The days that I don't do that, it's a little bit of it feels like running through mud. I mean, so taking that time, find a time in your day. After I leave work, I oftentimes will go to the gym or go for a walk or go for a run. And those are other times that I'm, filling myself up. Yes, I'm working out and trying to be healthy, but just getting out. And what I've started doing here lately, I mean, I used to, whenever I'd go for a run or go for a walk, I always had to have music on. And here lately in my life, I've had a lot of things happening, a lot of distracting things that happen, and it can become busy. And so I've said, look, I just like the quiet, and so I leave the phone at home now. I leave the music at home, and I just want to walk and hear nature. Maybe that's just because I'm getting old. I don't know. I never understood that whenever I was younger. I always wanted, that stimulation, that kind of thing. But I think it's so important for you to break that tie for a minute, to be able to have that reflection point where you say, who am I? Who am I at this moment? How did I get here? Be appreciative of the things that have brought you to where you're at. Recognize the things in your life that have been good, and start with that position of gratitude and say, who do I want to become? And so, don't fall into the trap of thinking that who you are right now is who you're always going to be. There's going to be so many versions of yourself throughout life that you become, and so many different styles of yourself. I mean, how many times have you looked back at like a high school yearbook and you go, oh my gosh, I can't believe I used to do that with my hair. I came up in the 80s and 90s when, the girls all had the big bangs, like little radars up here and stuff. And Aquanet, man, there were like bugs just on everybody's. You didn't even need roach traps. You just go into a woman's bathroom back then, and there were roaches everywhere because they were stuck to the floor because of the Aquanet. So the reality is we change. We change how we look. We change who we are. We change what we like and that kind of stuff. Don't be afraid of that change. Embrace it. Start to take control of it and start to have fun with it, because that's where life becomes fun, is when you say, I can become something different. I can accomplish other things. It's not, you don't have to go do something crazy. It's not like you got to build rockets and go to Mars, but you can absolutely change who you are. And I think it starts with recognizing that who you are today is the residual past decisions that you've made so far. It's also taking time to be thankful for the things that have brought you to where you're at. And then it's also having the boundaries that give you the downtime to reflect and think about who you want to become. A lot of times it's easy to get on that treadmill, like I said. You're running around and you're doing things, and suddenly life goes on autopilot, and it starts to take you in a direction. You start to become a version of yourself that you don't really like, that you're not really happy with, that you're not fulfilled with. And it happens so quickly, but it's these little things that we do that over time, and I talk about this constantly. It's these little things that we start doing and these little things that we say over time that start to compound, and suddenly we're this version of ourselves we don't recognize or we don't want to be. And so if you're in that state right now, it's really a simple process of taking time to unplug, put the phone away, do something to go be able to reflect, fill yourself up, and start asking, what am I saying? How am I referring to myself right now? How do I define myself right now? And do I like this part? Do I like this version of myself? Or do I want to better it? Do I want to become something different? And if the answer is yes to that, then you have to start changing the way that you talk about yourself and projecting yourself. And it may even change, like I did, changing my image. Like I said, long hair, a bunch of piercings. I recognize that, the people that I wanted to be where they were at, they weren't going to accept me in that version of myself. And so I changed it. It didn't have to be a defining moment in my life. That didn't have to define me. And so be willing to make those changes. And when you're willing to make those changes, suddenly you can start to become an even better version of yourself. And, look, I talk about the Bible a lot in this because I am very strong in my faith. But we're encouraged to do the same things. Scripture is that's a resounding theme throughout Scripture, is constantly working to better yourself, and not for selfish purposes, but for good purposes. How do you impact the world around you? How do you make the world around you better? Well, you do that by becoming the best version of yourself. When I first went in the military, it was a rude awakening. I was 25 years old. I'd been living on my own at that point for quite a while. I'd lived in downtown Chicago. And I was used to doing things how I like to do them. And suddenly I was thrust in this situation. I wasn't really thrust, I volunteered, but whether I volunteered or not, I was put into basic training, where people are yelling at you every day. You're being told what you can eat, what you can have to drink, when you can go to bed, when you can get up. I mean, everything is regimented. And it was a rude awakening. And I was absolutely miserable in that situation. And then I got to my first duty station, and I had leaders that were not good people, and I struggled there. And I was on my second rotation in Iraq, and I was sitting there one day, and they had us living in these trailers at that point in time, because they'd actually brought trailers in for us to live in and stuff, rather than just sleeping on cots like we were the first time. And I was sitting there, and I was really frustrated because of where I was at. And I was really feeling like I felt trapped. Again, I'm not somebody who likes a lot of control in my life. I like to have flexibility in what I do and that kind of stuff. But I was feeling very trapped. I was very, very frustrated. And so I started to examine where I was at, and I said, all right, how do I change this? I can't leave, right? I can't be a deserter. I can't leave the Army because then you go to jail, right? So that wasn't an option. I can't, if I, tried to get chaptered out, is what they called it, tried to figure out if I had some sort of physical ailment to get chaptered out or med boarded out, that would take forever, and so I had a couple years left on my contract. And I made a decision at that point in time. I said, I am going to become the best version of myself in this situation that I can be. So that meant that I was going to become an expert at the job that I was given in the military at the time. And at the time, I worked on turbine engines on all the helicopters. And I said, so how do I learn as much about that as I can possibly learn? How do I become an expert at that? And then I said, I'm going to become the best physical version of myself, so because there's a lot of physical fitness in the military. And so I started running every day. I started working out on a regular basis and suddenly started, they graded your PT test. The PT test back then was push-ups, sit-ups, and a 2-mile run. And so if you maxed it, that meant that you hit the max for your age that you could do. And so I started maxing my PT test because I started working out. And in doing so, in making that determination that I was going to become the best version that I could possibly be in that situation, some really neat things started happening. Suddenly, I was being given jobs that my peers weren't being given. And I was being given latitude to do things that my peers weren't getting. And my peers actually got upset about it. They got jealous of it and they fell away. I devoted time to others. I got other people interested in running and they started running with me. And I went to the command staff and said, hey, I'd like to take a team up to run the Army 10-miler in Washington, D.C. And they said, absolutely, you can do that. In fact, if you guys want to have your own training schedule, you don't have to show up to PT in the morning. You have your own training schedule. So we had our own training schedule. We did all that. They gave us vans to drive up there. They gave us money to get up there. And, we took 21 soldiers to do that. And it was really interesting. Still to this day, a lot of those soldiers that were with me at the time say that that was their favorite time in the military, And I think back to, what if I just stayed miserable? What if I just stayed frustrated in my situation? Those people would not have gotten that experience. And I'm not saying that to brag on myself. I'm saying that because it was that one thing that I decided to change, that how I was saying things. Instead of saying, I am frustrated, I hate this, I started saying, oh, I can become a better version of myself. I am really good at this, I am happy here. And I started doing that, and the whole trajectory changed. A lot of my command staff are clients of mine today. I ended up holding a position. By the time I left the military, I ended up holding an O2 position, which is a captain's position, but I was a sergeant, which is really unheard of. But my NCOER, which is my review, actually talks about that, And it was also at that exact moment on that second rotation, 2005. I'll never forget, I wrote, someday I'm going to have my own financial firm. I had no idea what that would look like or how I would get there, but I wrote it down and started working on becoming the best version of myself. Now, it's not something I get right all the time. I struggle with this just like everybody does. It's easy to fall into traps. It's easy to fall into repetition of doing the same thing over and over and over again and getting the same result over and over again. But I can always go back to those time periods where I have radically shifted my life and see the activities that I've done and apply those to my life now to change the trajectory of where I'm going. But again, it takes that time to be in that state where you take time to reflect and ask those questions of yourself, and then also finding ways to fulfill yourself, fill yourself up, so to speak. Put yourself in that peak state, because it can be really hard, but you can only do that if you set healthy boundaries in life and you take the time and you protect that time. I think that's probably one of the most important things, is taking time to be able to have that reflection time and protect those activities that you get filled up, that you get energized by. It was interesting. I had gone in the military in 2002, so in 2005 is when this happened. I ended up getting out in 2009. And from 2005 to 2009, my military experience was completely different than 2002 to 2005. It was really interesting how vastly different it was and how much more fulfilling it was. And so now when people say, well, what'd you think about being in the military? I'm like, I wouldn't be who I am today had I not done it. I wouldn't be where I'm at today had I not done it. I loved every minute of it. And the reality is the first 3 years I hated it because I was looking at it in the wrong way and I used the wrong talk around it. And so maybe you're in a situation in life where you can't necessarily control where you're at, but you can absolutely control the version of yourself in that position. Maybe you're in the military, maybe you're in a job that's frustrating to you. Maybe you got a boss that's just sucks. Take the time to say, all right, look, how do I become the best version of myself, and start doing the talk around that, giving yourself that talk, and start projecting yourself that way and see what happens. See if it doesn't change who you are drastically. It doesn't happen overnight. Again, I wrote the goal in 2005 that I was going to have my own financial firm someday. It wasn't until 2019 that actually came into fruition. There was a long time period in there that it took for that to happen. I became a financial advisor. I built a practice, and then, met my business partner. We started to expand and then grow out a firm. And so, and it's been amazing to see. But it's about having the patience, about saying in every situation, in the times that even when you're frustrated, it's saying, how do I become the best version of myself in all areas? How do I become the best husband, best wife, whatever it is. And when you start changing that talk, rather than looking at life as expecting things to come to you, rather than saying, well, I expect this, saying, I expect me to become this. And when you become that, suddenly the people, the things, and the stuff that are supposed to be in your life are going to show up. It's amazing to watch happen. It's something that I've seen happen in my own life. And, it's actually really good doing this talk because it's a great reminder to myself, because sometimes I forget. It's easy to get in those states where you're struggling with stuff, you've got a lot happening, and you forget that you can take control of who you are and start to redefine who you are and become somebody completely different. As many people have said throughout the years, this time has not come to stay, it has come to pass. And so I think you have to recognize it, whether it's a good time period for you or a bad time period for you. It's not here to stay. It's going to pass. And so if you want to keep it good, you have to change your focus and start becoming that person that keeps it good. Or if it's bad and you want to make it good, you have to become that person too. So anyway, those are my thoughts for today. A little bit more philosophical talk, I think, but all stuff that I think that is relevant to what we're talking about building wealth together as a family. These are things that you can start to teach yourself, start to teach your family, and you start to look at it not just from your self-centered point of view, but start looking at it and go, how do we become the best family that we can become? What version do we want to be, in a year, 2 years, 3 years, 5 years from now? And it's not so much about writing out goals. I do think that those are important, but taking that time to reflect, fulfill yourself, get yourself in a situation where you are energized. Do something that's fun. Break up the monotony. You can only do that, though, if you set those boundaries and you say no to certain things to give yourself the time to be able to go do them. And when you do, suddenly life becomes a lot of fun, and you can have a lot of fun at it. I really enjoyed doing this today because it was just a good reminder to myself about this, because I've been working through some stuff right now. I've been down in the weeds on stuff. So again, I don't do this perfectly all the time. But it's a really good reminder of what we can do. So until next time, everybody be safe. We'll talk to you soon. Have a great day.